"Madam, we are fully booked. Please wait until the other passengers are served." The flight attendant's voice cut through the quiet hum of the first-class cabin, her smile vanishing the moment she turned to address Aisha Monroe. Aisha's fingers paused on the call button. Her face remained perfectly composed, a skill honed through years of boardroom negotiations. But beneath her calm exterior, a familiar heat rose in her chest. She'd paid for the same premium service as everyone else in first class, yet once again found herself being treated as if she didn't belong. "But Mom, you pressed the button first," whispered 10-year-old Malik, his dark eyes wide with confusion, as he watched the same flight attendant immediately rush to serve a white businessman across the aisle who had pressed his button after them. Aisha squeezed her son's hand gently. "It's okay, sweetie," she murmured, though they both knew it wasn't. This wasn't the first time they'd experienced this particular brand of subtle discrimination, where the rules somehow applied differently depending on the color of your skin. The flight attendant, Cassandra according to her name tag, continued gliding down the aisle, offering champagne and warm towels to other passengers while deliberately avoiding eye contact with Aisha. Each passing minute stretched the tension tighter, like a rubber band about to snap. What Cassandra didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the black single mother she'd just dismissed wasn't just any passenger. The woman she'd deemed unworthy of prompt service was Aisha Monroe, the sole owner and CEO of Aurora Air, the very airline whose uniform Cassandra wore with such pride. In the next few minutes, this flight would transform from a routine cross-country journey into a powerful lesson about prejudice, privilege, and the danger of making assumptions. The confrontation that was about to unfold would not only change the trajectory of Cassandra's career, but would spark a national conversation about the invisible barriers that still exist, even in the rarefied air of first class. If you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of appearance, hit subscribe and type "respect" in the comments below. Aisha Monroe didn't look like what most people expected from a CEO who controlled a billion-dollar airline. At 38, she preferred understated elegance over flashy displays of wealth. Her simple gold studs rather than diamonds. Her navy blazer tailored but not designer-labeled. Her success lived in her quiet confidence, not in boastful proclamations. After building Aurora Air from a two-plane regional carrier into a major airline with 87 aircraft and routes spanning 4 continents, Aisha could have afforded to travel by private jet. Instead, she regularly flew commercial on her own airline, usually unannounced, to experience the service exactly as her customers did. "Mom, can I have the window seat next time?" Malik asked, his curious eyes taking in every detail of the cabin. "Of course, sweetheart," Aisha replied, smoothing his curly hair. "Remember what I always tell you about these trips?" Malik nodded seriously. "That it's important to see how things really work, not just how people say they work." This was the education Aisha provided her son, beyond his prestigious private school. She taught him to observe, to question, and to understand that respect was non-negotiable, regardless of who you were or where you came from. The first-class cabin of Flight 372 represented everything Aisha had insisted on when designing Aurora Air's premium experience. The hand-stitched leather seats reclined to full beds, the lighting adjusted to passengers' preferences. Each seat featured privacy screens and personal temperature controls. The menu offered dishes created by renowned chefs, with ingredients sourced from local farms near destination cities. Every detail reflected Aisha's founding philosophy, excellence and respect for every passenger. She'd built Aurora Air after experiencing discrimination at other airlines, both as a passenger and during her early career in aviation management. Her company handbook opened with a simple mission statement. "At Aurora Air, we rise above, not just in altitude, but in how we treat each other." The luxury surrounding her wasn't what gave Aisha satisfaction. It was knowing that every employee, from baggage handlers to pilots, received fair wages, comprehensive benefits, and advancement opportunities regardless of background. She'd created the company she wished had existed when she was struggling as a young single mother with big dreams. Now, Watching her son flip through the in-flight magazine featuring an article about female aviation pioneers, Aisha felt a surge of pride, until Cassandra's cold voice interrupted her thoughts once again. 20 minutes into the flight, the inequality in service became impossible to ignore. Cassandra floated through the cabin with practiced efficiency. For some passengers, he refilled the white businessman's champagne without him asking. She checked on the elderly white couple across the aisle. "Is the temperature comfortable for you? Can I bring you anything else?" Yet, when Aisha pressed her call button again, Cassandra's eyes slid past her as if she were invisible. "Excuse me," Aisha finally said, her voice firm but controlled. "We've been waiting to order our meals." Cassandra's smile tightened. "As I mentioned, we're very busy. I'll get to you when I can." She turned away immediately, rushing to help a white woman who hadn't even requested assistance. Malik looked up from his book, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. At 10 years old, he was already learning to recognize these moments. Aisha felt a sharp pain in her chest, not for herself, but for her son. Witnessing this lesson, she'd hoped he wouldn't need to learn so young. This treatment wasn't new. Aisha's mind flashed to the luxury car dealership, where salesmen had ignored her until she mentioned her budget. The real estate agent who'd shown her only homes in certain neighborhoods until she'd revealed her title. The first-class lounge where staff had questioned her ticket's authenticity 3 separate times, each memory stacked upon the last, building a familiar weight she carried everywhere. She'd designed Aurora Air specifically to counter these experiences, implementing rigorous training programs to ensure all passengers received equal treatment regardless of race, gender, or appearance. Now, watching Cassandra warmly serve everyone except her and Malik, Aisha faced a choice. She could stay quiet, protecting her anonymity and collecting data on her airline service failures, or she could speak up, not just as a passenger, but as the CEO. "Mom," Malik whispered, "why is she being mean to us?" That innocent question settled it. Aisha straightened her blazer and made her decision. This wasn't just about a meal service anymore. This was about showing her son that dignity wasn't something you begged for. It was something you demanded when it was rightfully yours. When Cassandra breezed by again, deliberately avoiding eye contact, Aisha reached out and gently touched her arm. "I need to speak with your supervisor immediately," she said, her voice calm but carrying an authority that made several nearby passengers turn their heads. Cassandra's expression shifted from dismissive to defensive. She clearly wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone she'd deemed unimportant. "What would you do if you were treated this way? Share your thoughts in the comments." Aisha pressed the call button once more. This time, a different flight attendant, Ryan according to his badge, approached with visible reluctance. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone suggesting the problem was Aisha herself. "Yes," Aisha replied evenly. "I've been attempting to order our meals for nearly 40 minutes now. Every other passenger in first class has been served except us." She gestured to Malik, who sat quietly watching the exchange. Ryan's eyes darted to Cassandra, who was arranging a white passenger's blanket with careful attention. "I'm sure Cassandra will get to you soon. We serve passengers based on our routing system." "Interesting," Aisha said, her voice cooling several degrees. "I wasn't aware Aurora Air had implemented a routing system that somehow skips over black passengers consistently." Ryan's face flushed. "That's not... You can't just... Can't just what?" Aisha asked. "Notice discrimination when it's happening. I've observed Cassandra serve every single passenger in this cabin except us. The only difference I can see is the color of our skin." The businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper, now fully invested in the conversation. Several other passengers had gone quiet, sensing the tension. Cassandra rushed over, clearly agitated by the developing situation. "Is there an issue here?" she demanded. "Yes," Aisha stated firmly. "There's a significant issue with the service discrimination happening on this flight." Cassandra's professional veneer cracked. "How dare you accuse me of discrimination? I've been following protocol." "Which protocol instructs you to ignore select passengers?" Aisha asked. Please direct me to that section in your training manual. I'd be very interested to read it." "Listen," Cassandra hissed, leaning closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If you can't handle waiting your turn, perhaps first class isn't the right fit for you." A ripple of shock passed through the nearby passengers. Even Ryan looked uncomfortable with Cassandra's comment. The cabin fell silent. Malik reached for his mother's hand, squeezing it tightly. Aisha took a deep breath. She had planned to remain anonymous during this flight, to observe and take notes quietly. But this moment demanded more, not just for herself, but for every passenger who had ever been made to feel unwelcome based on appearance. "Cassandra," Aisha said, her voice steady and clear enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I'd like your full name and employee ID number, please." "I don't have to give you that," Cassandra replied, crossing her arms defensively. "Actually, you do," Aisha said, reaching into her bag. She removed a business card and handed it to Cassandra. "I am Aisha Monroe, and I happen to be the owner and CEO of Aurora Air." The card, embossed with the Aurora Air logo and Aisha's title, trembled in Cassandra's suddenly unsteady hand. Her face drained of color as her eyes darted between the card and Aisha's calm expression. That's impossible," Cassandra stammered. "Is it?" Aisha asked. "Or did you simply decide what was possible based on assumptions about who belongs in first class and who doesn't?" A stillness fell over the first-class cabin. The hum of the engines seemed to grow louder in the absence of conversation as passengers processed what they'd just witnessed. The businessman who had been served immediately lowered his eyes, suddenly fascinated by his untouched meal. The elderly couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman 3 rows back covered her mouth with her hand. Cassandra stood frozen, the business card still trembling between her fingers. Her posture, once proud and authoritative, crumpled like a paper cup. I had no idea," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "Ms. Monroe, please, You didn't know who I was," Aisha finished for her. "That's precisely the problem. No passenger should be treated differently based on assumptions about who they might be." Ryan, the second flight attendant, had gone pale. "Ms. Monroe, I deeply apologize for this situation. I'll contact the lead immediately." A passenger across the aisle cleared his throat. "I saw the whole thing," he offered. "The service discrepancy was unmistakable." Others nodded in agreement, some now looking at their own prompt service with new understanding. Malik tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, though in the quiet cabin his voice carried, "are you going to fire her?" The question hung in the air. Every passenger seemed to hold their breath, waiting for Aisha's response. Aisha looked at her son, then at Cassandra, whose eyes were now brimming with tears of mortification. "Malik, firing someone is sometimes necessary, but it doesn't solve the deeper problem. What's more important is changing the system that allows this behavior to exist." Over the intercom, a new voice spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Thomas Reed, the regional manager for this flight. I've been listening to the situation that has developed, and on behalf of Aurora Air, I want to extend our deepest apologies to Ms. Monroe and her son, and indeed to all our passengers who witnessed this unacceptable lapse in our service standards." Reed continued, "Ms. Monroe has built this airline on principles of equality and respect. What happened today violates everything we stand for. I'll be personally speaking with each of you before we land, and I assure you that this incident will lead to immediate changes in our training protocols." Cassandra was quietly escorted to the crew area, her face streaked with tears. As she passed Aisha's seat, she whispered, "I'm truly sorry." Aisha nodded once, acknowledging the apology, but making no promises about Cassandra's future with the company. Her focus remained on Malik, whose wide eyes were taking in a lesson more valuable than any classroom could provide. If you've ever witnessed discrimination and wished someone would stand up against it, like this video and share your story. By the time Flight 372 landed, passengers had already shared videos of the confrontation online. Within hours, Aurora Air and Aisha Monroe were trending across platforms. The clips showed a black woman calmly standing her ground against discrimination, only to reveal she owned the entire airline. The public response was overwhelming. Comments flooded in from people who had experienced similar treatment, thanking Aisha for using her position to highlight an issue many suffered in silence. News outlets picked up the story, featuring headlines like, "CEO experiences discrimination on her own airline, responds with class." 3 days after the incident, Aisha held a press conference announcing sweeping changes at Aurora Air. "Today, we're implementing mandatory quarterly anti-bias training for all 8,700 employees. We're establishing a passenger advocacy board with members from diverse backgrounds. And we're creating an anonymous reporting system for both passengers and staff to document instances of discrimination." The aviation industry took notice. Within weeks, 2 other major airlines announced similar initiatives, citing Aurora Air's leadership as inspiration. Business schools began using the incident as a case study in crisis management and ethical leadership. Diversity consultants referenced it as a perfect example of how addressing discrimination directly could transform corporate culture. For Aisha, the most meaningful impact came during a quiet moment with Malik a week after the flight. While helping with his homework, she noticed he'd chosen to write about the incident for a school assignment. "What was the most important thing you learned that day?" she asked him. Malik thought carefully before answering that sometimes being quiet isn't the right thing, and that when you have power, you should use it to help others who don't. Aisha smiled, knowing that this lesson, about standing up with dignity rather than shrinking from confrontation, would serve him throughout his life. The incident aboard Flight 372 wasn't just a viral moment or corporate scandal. It became a catalyst for genuine change, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or resignation, but calm assertion of one's rightful place in the world. This story shows the power of dignity in the face of discrimination. Subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and justice, and let us know what you thought in the comments.